welcome to this edition of IAMPETH Inside the Penman studio. We're very fortunate today to have White House calligrapher and IAMPETH master penman Richard Muffler, or Rick Muffler. Rick, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure.
Let's start off right from the beginning. When did you first become interested in the calligraphic arts and the pen arts?
I'm not interested at all.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. But when did you first become interested?
Handwriting as a child.
Okay.
My mother always had good handwriting, and because it was a curriculum in parochial school, we had practices and things like that. And I noticed it kind of made me a little different because the handwriting was nice, and I enjoyed the flow of it and the satisfaction of accomplishment.
Right. Was it a specific form of handwriting instruction?
It was the Palmer method.
Palmer method. Everyone has said Palmer method so far. Okay. And so when did you sort of become aware of the calligraphic arts?
When I went to art school to study advertising.
And where'd you go to art school?
There was a tiny little college called Chamberlain School of Art, later becoming Chamberlain Junior College. Now it has disappeared off the face of the earth.
Okay. And what about specifically in the pointed pen discipline? Because you can do sort of the whole gambit of things, but I know you originally from the pointed pen side of things, having met you back in 1999. So when did you become interested in pointed pen art form?
The pointed pen was, I guess, a natural progression. The real interest in it was when I first went to the White House as a volunteer, and basically the handwriting was what they were after. Okay. And the two gentlemen, Bill Gemmell and John Scarfone, appreciated the handwriting and decided that, hey, let's give the kid a try and stick a pen in his hand. Well, you don't know how funny it looked with the oblique holder for a right-handed person with a left-hander using it.
Right.
Bill had the brainstorm. Let's get somebody to take the flange, reverse it. And then they put it in my hand, and I had a natural feel with it. And for the next 15 years, they apprenticed me and made sure that I knew what I was doing. And after 15 years, I was able to do my first real place card.
This was at the White House?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, but your family's history with the White House goes back before your time.
Well before.
Could you explain a little bit to our membership and our audience about how far back it goes?
My grandfather started in, I believe, the early 20s. Warren Harding was his first president. He was known at that time as a footman, and what a footman would do is jump out of a car and open the door. Later became a chauffeur, and he would drive the first family around, the first lady, their family, guests. And as years progressed and security became more and more tight, he moved up to what would be known now as a valet. He would do personal errands for them. Then my father, after World War II, came to the White House as an electrician, and later moved on to be the clock winder.
Okay.
He wind all the clocks.
Do they still have a clock winder at the White House?
They do, but not the way it was done with my dad.
Okay.
And he would also manufacture pieces for a lot of the vintage clocks that you can't go to Home Depot and buy the parts for.
Okay.
So he would fabricate a lot of pieces.
Okay.
So, and he started with Roosevelt.
And when did you come into the White House, under which administration?
Carter.
Carter, okay. And so you've been there since, and one of our other master penmen in the group is also at the White House as well, Patricia Blair. We'll get to interview her at some point in the future. She's actually not at the convention this year. Rick, tell me, when did you, because you have a deep love, like I do, of the history of our art form, of the golden age of ornamental penmanship and handwriting in this country. When did you first sort of hook into that as sort of a real interest and a burning interest for you?
Honestly, it became a passion. I'll call it a passion at my first IAMPETH convention.
Which was when?
A long time ago.
Okay.
20 years, I believe.
Okay.
So,
all right. So it was at the IAMPETH convention you were first exposed to those folks. Okay.
Yep.
During your formative years in the calligraphic arts and in pointed pen, and you can have different mentors, state different members for different areas of the art form, broad pen, illumination versus pointed pen. But who would you point to as your mentors in those different disciplines?
I'm going to make that a twofold answer for you. My early days, my mom and dad.
Okay.
Mom, like I said, always had good handwriting and was very encouraging with it, and would work with me on the homework assignments, something they don't do anymore, much less teach in school. She would work with me at length. There was a point in time where the nuns would want to change me to be a right-hander. I'm a lefty. And when she talked to the pediatrician about it, he said, don't even think about changing them. And so I got the double whammy. You know, the knuckles on the ruler, plus it's the devil's hand.
Right.
But now, having said that, my father, whose handwriting was less than desirable, I think he taught me the finest lesson that I've carried through my entire life, both in the lettering arts as well as life itself.
Okay.
He used to cut the erasers off my pencil, because if I made a mistake, I'd erase it and start over.
He literally cut the erasers off?
Yes.
Okay.
And he said, you know, you need to learn from your mistakes. Sage advice.
Yes, absolutely.
So I credit both of them with the early days. Shortly after that, fast forward about 19 years or so, we get to the White House. My dad was not happy with me being gainfully unemployed, so I came into the White House as a volunteer to address envelopes. And like I said, they enjoyed what they saw, and they really did work with me. So that's John Scarfone and Bill Gemmell, honestly, are my two biggest
So you almost had like a
mentors.
traditional apprenticeship in many
Absolutely.
ways. Okay.
Absolutely.
On-the-job apprenticeship.
Yep.
Yeah, well, that's the best way.
And, you know, in addition to the lettering, they also taught me the White House way of etiquette and protocol that they learned when they first started. So it's passing on the history.
Rick, speaking of the history in the Golden Age, you know, which one of the past masters do you admire most? And you can name more than one, but if you had to pick one out, who would it be? You can name more than one, but if you had one of them.
That's tough because of all the different disciplines that are involved. I would say, since my true affection is for script writing, it would have to be Lupfer, but not limited to. Zahner.
Oh, yeah.
Another
all-around
one.
master. Both of them were all-around masters. Yeah, and they had a high degree of proficiency in not just a few, but all of the art, all of the forms of our art. Yeah, I fully agree with that assessment.
So, those are my two key.
Rick, at this point, audience, at this point, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back with part 2 of our interview with IAMPETH Master Penman, Richard Muffler. And when we come back, I'm going to ask Rick about some of the challenges he faced as a left-handed person in both school and in calligraphy and in the pen arts. Thank you very much. Welcome back to the IAMPETH Penman studio, and in this edition we're going to be speaking with IAMPETH Master Penman and White House calligrapher Richard Muffler. Rick, I want to go back to your time in school, earliest years. You said you were influenced by your mom's handwriting, but what challenges, if any, did you face as a left-handed person attempting to do this? You alluded to some of the stuff with, maybe them trying to reverse your hands, different hands. There was actually a belief at one time, even with teachers of handwriting, that to try and get people to become right-handed. What was your own personal experience?
Smearing. I mean, that is, you talk about challenges.
Right.
In the grade schools, the early grade schools, 1st through 4th, maybe 5th grade, it was always use pencil, and you had the lead all over your hand. That wasn't as much of a challenge until we got our first ballpoint pen. Ooh, you moved up the food chain then. And that's when I discovered you smear, holding the pen the proper way. The traditional Palmer method is they show you with the point going over your shoulder and all those nice positionings. So I developed an overhand hook.
So it wasn't a natural thing for you to have the hook. The hook was created because you were trying to avoid some issue you encountered.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And did you find a lot of prejudice against left-handers when you were a boy in school?
Not really.
Okay.
Not a lot of prejudice. You had some of the real old school nuns that they took exception to being told no.
Mm.
And that really was about the only challenge. That and, why couldn't you be more like your brother?
One of the things I said in previous interviews with other candidates is that, when we inducted our first class of masters at IAMPETH, it was very interesting to note that of that class, 3 of you were left-handers. Yourself, Rosemary Buchek, and John DeColobus, and I've always said publicly that I feel John DeColobus is the greatest living pointed pen artist in the world. There's nobody that can match him, and yet he's a left-hander. So what would you say to somebody who says, well, I can't really do this because I'm left-handed?
I just tell him, yeah, you're right, because I can't do this. See, this is a piece I did before I got out of bed today.
Rick's referring to C.P. Zahner's magnificent masterpiece, his Eagle, that Zahner actually acknowledged as his masterpiece. Now I'll actually zoom in to show you a little closer up of that. But we have this on our website. But it's a wonderful specimen. And so, Rick, so it is possible to be a calligrapher, obviously, because you're sitting here talking to me,
right,
and be left-handed. But let me ask you a question. When you write, because as somebody who teaches in grocer script, the copper plate style of penmanship, of writing, I have trouble advising. I'm right-handed. I have trouble advising a left-hander. So when do you decide if you're going to use an oblique holder, a straight pen? If you write with the hook, don't write with the hook. What do you tell someone? How do you advise somebody who's lefty? How would you approach that? Do you first start finding out that they write with a hook or not?
You put different points in their hand. You put an oblique in their hand. You give them the straight. Or like Rosemary with a configuration like that, but that's developed.
Yes.
And see what's most comfortable, that they can get their strokes correct, that they can see what they're doing, which is very key to any
see
kind
what
of
they're
lettering.
doing, right?
Yes. Which is why the oblique holder was probably a godsend.
Yeah, it would almost seem like in certain forms of lettering, let's say for Hebrew, it would be an advantage to be left-handed because you're writing from right to left.
Good point.
Right. So now you personally write with, you mentioned a reversed oblique pen holder, and essentially when a righty writes, the flange is on the left side, inside. When Rick writes, his flange is on the outside of his left hand, correct?
No.
No, it's on the inside. Inside.
It is on the inside.
But in your left hand.
But in my left hand.
Right. Okay. See, I'm confused by it. Okay.
Yeah, you ought to try being lefty and explain
well, yeah. So what I generally do when somebody emails me on the internet and asks me a question, I will generally refer them to someone like John who will respond and ask them a question and answer the question for them because I just don't have sufficient response for them and don't know how to really handle it. But
so you're passing the buck. Thanks.
Passing the buck, exactly. So what advice would you give to somebody who's struggling to learn pointed pen arts and they're lefty, but they're really struggling? What advice would you give them?
Very simply, what is going to work for you the best? What is most comfortable for you? Learn your basic strokes. And even if you start using a pencil, just so you know where your weights are going on it, just so you at least in the depths of your mind know where it's supposed to go, because you're focusing after that on your ink coverage and all these other elements that you have to think about all at once when you're lettering. Again, just try everything, and what is most comfortable is the way to go.
So a few things I'll add to that is, come to an IAMPETH convention if at all possible. You will find more than you need in the way of instruction for left-handers here. The other thing I would strongly suggest is to contact myself or John DeColobus, and I'll have John DeColobus's website where you can contact him through up on this video clip. John is, as I said, a left-handed penman, and he's always been very willing to help. So I think getting instruction early enough, because all my efforts have been to get people into the art form and keep them, but if you can't get the pen to function, you'll never be able to do much with the art form. And I want you to know that it's very possible to become a great calligrapher, a great master penman with it, and be able to do that as a lefty. And so remember, the first group that was inducted, 3 of the 5, I think it were left-handers. So if somebody tells you you can't do it because you're lefty, it's nonsense.
Walk away.
Exactly, walk away. I think we're going to take a quick break right now. When we come back with Rick, we're going to talk about his involvement with IAMPETH as an organization. Rick was a past president, and so we'll just pick that up in our next segment with Rick Muffler. Thank you. Hi, welcome back to IAMPETH Inside the Penman Studios, and once again we have IAMPETH Master Penman and White House calligrapher Richard Muffler with us. Rick, let's go right to IAMPETH now.
Okay.
When did you first become aware of this organization?
By a pure fluke. A mutual friend of my then sister-in-law had a friend that was a member out of Rochester, Dottie Alexander.
Oh, yes.
Remember Dottie?
Yes, I do.
And she told her friend, who told my sister-in-law, who told my wife, who told me. Now, at that point, my experience with guilds and things like that, it kind of soured me because people were more interested in my chair and not me.
So even as a member of the White House calligraphy staff, you hadn't heard of IAMPETH at that point?
That is true.
Okay.
That is true.
All right. So it's interesting it was throughout Rochester because my first calligraphy group was Rochester, that same group where Dottie
Exactly,
was.
the Penmanship Club. Yep.
Yes, exactly, the Greater Rochester Penmanship Club. What do you see now, if somebody reads IAMPETH's title, it can be a little intimidating for them, the International Association of Master Penmen, Engrossers and Teachers of Handwriting. But what do you see as IAMPETH's role or its mission? What do you see as the mission of this group?
Well, to prove that engrossers doesn't mean that you bag groceries, first and foremost.
That's it.
The actual mission really is to preserve not only the art form, but encourage it and develop it as a bigger outreach to not just the lettering community, but to John Q. public. Give them a little more of an education and appreciation for what has been done and what's
Right, the
going to
history of
continue.
it too, exactly, exactly. So you've been a member now since 1991 is the date I have here.
That sounds about right.
And so how has the organization progressed over those 20 years?
In many ways, actually. It went from your typical one-room schoolhouse feel with a handful of people showing up each year to what we have today, well over 200 people. And as it has progressed, by word of mouth, people are getting more and more interested. And with the advent of the internet and your efforts on there, it was one of the biggest outreaches I've ever seen in any organization, really. So having said that, the growth is the biggest change. Following that is the level and quality of the workshops that we provide now.
Right.
At one point there was a struggle, seeing the same programs over and over again, and it became more of a social fair, which is not a bad thing because IAMPETH, and I've always said, is my extended family.
Yes, same here. The term has been used a lot in these
interviews.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
So that was one of the big changes. The other, with the sheer numbers, there was a time where there was a struggle to meet a minimum requirement for a hotel.
Yes, under like around 70 or 75 people. And,
Yeah.
And now Jenny registered, Rick's wife is Jenny Muffler, as she's the current president, and we're at the convention that Jenny's and has done a lot of incredible work for, and with your assistance. But Rick himself has been president how many times?
3 times.
3 times. So you have a very unique perspective on the inner clockwork mechanism of this organization. And now we registered initially around 230 some odd people for this convention in Phoenix. And I think the final attendance was about 215. And so that is staggering to me, as I'm sure it is to you. But what would you say to the person who reads our name and they get intimidated by the title, and where am I going to go to this convention with all these masters? What have you heard from people? Because I know what my experience was like. Family is a great use for this word. But does somebody have to worry about their skill level when they come here? Can a novice come here? If someone's a little shy, is this a group of, or can you get lost in this group, or is it? It's a leading question because I know what the answer is. And,
We've had the conversation many times.
Yes.
But for the record, master and novice alike are more than welcome. To come here cold, never having picked up a pen, there is enough guidance that's available for this newcomer to learn the basics from some of the best people you've got. And there is no hesitation on their willingness to share this knowledge, which is one of our mission statements.
Right.
So even if it's showing them how to hold a pencil and put in their weights, as a practice. So anything is possible.
Rick, I mean, technology, right, as it's come into IAMPETH, and the one really responsible for that was Rosemary Buchek, and I think with Maria Thomas's urging, Rosemary introduced the document camera to our group and digital projectors, and this occurred back in Chicago. Now, back in the day when I joined, and obviously when you joined back in '91, there were people doing blackboard presentations.
Oh yeah,
drawing with those. What do they call those copper plate things? The Whopper plate.
Whopper plate,
for
yes.
chalk. And so, do you think it's been I think another leading question, but a benefit to IAMPETH or a detriment to go with the technology in our classrooms?
From an historical perspective, there was a time where chalkboard writing was
Right.
a part of a curriculum.
Absolutely.
So that was part of the tradition why it was done.
Right.
In later years, we would use the whiteboard and then just flip chart paper. I think now people get to see the pens up close and personal, how, say, John holds his hand, how Rosemary, from the lefty's perspective, but even Mike Sull and some of the other folks, you get to see their hand, the motion with the hand up close, and it's projected in such a way that there's no mistaking what he's doing.
Right,
or she.
right. I agree. And I think the other thing, too, about this organization I'd like to get across to people is that, this, and I've said this in previous interviews, if you go to a top-tier golf match and you see the top players in the world, chances are you're not going to be hanging out with them at the bar. You're not going to be able to pull. You're not going to be able to pull the Tiger Woods or Jack Nicklaus equivalent on the side and have them give you a little golf lesson. But that's one of the incredible things about this group is that you can work. And in my opinion, the finest point and pen people in the world are members of IAMPETH and attend if they can our conventions. And so, but these same folks will be willing to sit down with you and help you. It's not like someone's going to ask you for money to do that or be reluctant to share. It's open sharing here. And my own progress has been, this group is sort of the real spark for me that allowed that to happen. So it's got a definitely different flavor than many other types of, this is what's been coming up, other types of calligraphy conventions. And okay, let's get back now to your own role and the masters in this organization. So you are one of IAMPETH's master penmen. Tell me what you see as the role of that organization within the greater organization, as well as its role for the greater calligraphic arts community. How do you see the master penman fitting in?
In a word, mentorship. Mentorship.
Right. I like that word.
That truly is how the program decided to evolve. It evolved on its own. You have people that are masters in their own right, but how do you, without having to sit down with a class and showing tons of people, you can review what they're doing and give them guidance along the way, which is what they should be doing in the first place. But as a certified master with this organization, it's incumbent upon all the participants, my fellow masters, that we don't just say, oh, that's real good. We sit down and give them a historical perspective of what we do and why we're doing it this way. Really give them a full, well-rounded background so that before their pen touches the paper, they understand why they're getting to this point, and then encourage their own personal development and growth.
When you look back and compare the state of pointed pen, I mean, there was a time in pointed pen, in the pointed pen arts when, we were almost going to lose this art form because it was dying out, particularly Spencerian script. Maybe the copper plate stuff would have been around because it was always picked up by wedding calligraphers.
Right.
But, Michael Sull was very instrumental, one of our members and past presidents, Master Penman Michael Sull. And I've got an interview with him. You can go look for that, where he actually recovered Spencerian script for us and did a very great job of that. But when you look back from the time you got involved with this to now, what do you see as the progress? And, do you see progress in the art form? Is it still at the edge of the abyss? Or have we moved back from the brink? Are we in a better state with the art form now than we were, say, in '91? Or in, what's your vision of that?
And no pun intended, I think it's starting to flourish.
Yes,
and
I agree.
And I mean that in the best of sense, excuse me. There's been such a newfound interest in it. And again, by word of mouth, people are saying, ooh, hey, this is really awesome stuff. And it's been a renaissance of sorts, not just for the pointed pen, but for your traditional engrossing broad pen hands as well. So with that in mind, I don't know how many articles I keep seeing appear in the New York Times, the Boston Globe. Oh, this lettering stuff is dead.
Right.
Well, don't start throwing the dirt on us yet.
Yes. Remember they said that about Apple computers at one time. They would go down, and I agree. I see the same thing. It's been, I think we have for our posterity, there's safety there now. The art form will not be lost, and IAMPETH plays the biggest role in that. We are a unique organization in that, our history and what we pay attention to, you can't find anywhere else, and if people think my interviews are promotions for IAMPETH, you're dead correct on that.
Because Joe never has ulterior motives.
Exactly. They're very pretty much on my sleeve. I want to ask you one final question. If you possessed a time machine and a video camera, and the time machine was specific to be able to go back and look for past masters, which master penman of the past would you go back and interview and film, and why?
Again, the two that I spoke of, Zahner and Lupfer. Those two were very well-rounded in all of their disciplines. They were very disciplined. But Mr. Lupfer especially had a twisted sense of humor on some of his things. He did little illustrations that he'd put in the Penman's Journal, inside jokes that the normal viewing public wouldn't get a chance to understand or get. But you see him, you kind of question it, and you get somebody like Mike Saul, who kind of knows the history of the personality. Or even Bill Lilly, for example, who studied with Earl Lupfer. Right. He said, oh yeah, he was kind of a character, quote unquote.
I think Mike said that Paul O'Hara called him Loopy.
Loopy.
It was his nickname for Lupfer. Yeah, I agree. Those are pretty amazing folks. And I'd like to interject at this point a quick story about Lupfer that appeared in one of the IAMPETH newsletters from years ago, told by Eileen Richardson, this was communicated directly to her by Earl Lupfer, because amazingly enough, Lupfer was a member of IAMPETH in the early days. And she tells a story when he was a student at the Zanarian College. Early on, C.P. Zahner, Charles Paxton Zahner, the gentleman who did this piece behind us, calls Lupfer into his office and says, listen, he says, son, he says, you're a nice guy, he says, but you don't have any aptitude for this, and I suggest you consider a career change. And Lupfer said that created such a burning desire with him that he eventually went on to sort of, in many ways, match C.P. Zahner's skill across the board. And I thought that was a great story, as told. He basically was told by Zahner, enough's enough, go on your way. And he wouldn't do it, and became one of the finest penmen we've ever seen, and arguably one of the most underrated penmen, because Zahner receives credit for many people know about this as being sort of one of the most amazing all-around penmen, but so was Lupfer. I've seen some of his script. It's just absolutely amazing.
And of course, in Lupfer's defense, success is the best revenge.
Yes, exactly. And this is something else I spoke to, I think, with Harvest about. Harvest Critton, another IAMPETH master penman. One of the marks of a true teacher and somebody who truly will be a mentor to someone is having the generosity not only to give of your talent and your knowledge, but the generosity to see your students progress to the point of being equal with you and maybe even surpass you. And so I think we have that here in large amount. Ego is sometimes a difficult thing to get around, but I think IAMPETH truly wants to see, this master truly wants to see people progress. And this is not a competition. I mean, we'll joke around there might be competition between us or with John DeCalabas,
but it's always good natured.
It's always good natured, and how many people can you really progress with? And I think that's really the key thing here. In order for someone, once you get to, let's say, my level or your level with a certain art, how do you make that extra little adjustment? And I think what most novices don't realize is the initial progress can be quite rapid. It's when you get to that point of being very good and you want to go to being incredible,
and really fine-tune it.
You have to have somebody who looks at it with, and I always joke around about John DeCalabas giving me some tips, and maybe initially I'm not as willing to listen to them, but I will always go back and consider his counsel and find out that, it was right. So,
and really, there's very, very little ego that comes to our
Exactly,
conventions. And
exactly.
that is really what's best.
Yeah, it really is. And it truly, that this could almost be like the family show, and the term has been used so much. So, but Richard, thank you so much,
Joe,
for your time. I do appreciate it.
it's a pleasure.
And audience, thank you so much, and look for other editions of IAMPETH Inside the Penman Studio.